This film begins with a woman named Jixing, who works as an expert technician at Guanghua Technology, where she makes AI medical robots. Jixing lives with her best friend, Tu Xiaoming, who is a popular live streaming host. One morning, like any other day, Jixing eagerly got ready to go to work, driven by her dream of buying a house with her boyfriend. Meanwhile, there's a middle-aged man named Wang, who is on the board of directors at Dongyang Technology. He is surprised to see the CEO of his company, Han Ting, on the same plane. Han Ting recently took over as CEO after his grandfather, Han Yujian. Wang didn't expect Han Ting, who just came back from Germany, to have documents that expose Wang's wrongdoings as a board member. Han Ting warns Wang not to cause trouble at the upcoming board meeting, or else all of Wang's secrets will be revealed. At the same time, Jixing starts worrying about being late for work because the train station near her house is temporarily closed. Without thinking twice, she decides to ride her bicycle to work. However, due to a careless cyclist, she accidentally bumped into a food delivery scooter and Han Ting's car. From the car, Han Ting notices that he knows Jixing. He then tells his personal assistant, Tang Song, to ask for Jixing's number to ask for her responsibilities. One day, Han Ting, who owns shares in the Guanghua company, came to attend a meeting about a new AI medical robot called the Bai Robot. The proposal for the Bai Robot was prepared by Jixing. The head of Guanghua, Zhang Di, asked Jixing to explain the proposal to everyone in the meeting room. At that time, Jixing had no trouble explaining everything about the Bai medical robot. As Jixing was presenting, Han Ting remembered her winning speech from 10 years ago at a robot competition. Back then, both Han Ting and Jixing were in college, and they worked together to create an AI medical robot that won the competition. Since then, Han Ting had secretly liked Jixing, and his feelings for her haven't changed. After the meeting, Jixing noticed that Han Ting was looking at her. She thought that Han Ting did this on purpose because he was the big boss of Dongyang. Meanwhile, Han Ting was chatting with Zhang Di, who was his childhood friend. Han Ting had become an investor in Guanghua to help Zhang Di, but it seemed that Zhang Di had stronger feelings for Han Ting. After work, Jixing met her junior from college, Su Zhizhou, at a cafe. Zhizhou shared his idea of starting a medical 3D printing business and asked Jixing to join him. But Jixing couldn't join yet because she wanted to use her savings to buy a house with her boyfriend. During their conversation, Zhang Di suddenly called Jixing and invited her to a business meeting with some important people that night to talk about the biomedical robot. Because of this, Jixing decided to rush home to get ready. Not wanting to look unprepared in front of the big bosses, she called her friend, Li, who is experienced in marketing and knows how to choose the right makeup for business events. That evening, Zhang Di came to pick up Jixing, while Jixing and Li waited by playing cards. When Zhang Di arrived with Jixing, Han Ting was surprised to see that Zhang Di had invited Jixing to the meeting. Soon after, Jixing started playing cards with the big bosses, which brought back memories for Han Ting and Jixing. Back in the present, Han Ting felt annoyed when he saw Zhao hugging Jixing. Because of this, Han Ting talked to Zhang Di about why she brought Jixing to the event. Han Ting disagreed with Zhang Di's idea of using Jixing to get Zhao interested in buying the biomedical robot. When he walked past Jixing, Han Ting told her to go home immediately. Unfortunately, Jixing actually thinks that Han Ting deliberately chased her away, whereas on the contrary, Han Ting means well and tries to protect Jixing. After the meeting, Han Ting decided to eat at a simple restaurant with Yi Xiao. This surprised Yi Xiao because he didn't expect a big boss like Han Ting to choose such a humble place to eat. They talked about Jixing, and Yi Xiao realized that Han Ting liked her. It was also revealed that Han Ting is the owner of the company Yi Xiao manages. Han Ting had purposely asked Yi Xiao to help manage his company. Through Yi Xiao, Han Ting invested in several companies, including Han Hai, a medical 3D printing company. Dongyang plans to acquire Han Hai, which will double Dongyang's shares. However, Han Ting kept this plan a secret from the board of directors, except for Yi Xiao and the CEO of Han Hai. At home, Jixing told Li and Xiaoming about her meeting with Han Ting. She shared how Han Ting, whom she knew from college, has changed so much that he feels like a different person to her now. Back then, after their team won the AI medical robot competition, Jixing and Han Ting planned to celebrate by having a meal together. But their plan fell through because Han Ting's grandfather suddenly sent him to Germany on the same day. Han Ting did message Jixing about it, but she never responded to his message. In the present, Han Ting, wanting to reconnect with Jixing, sent a message to her through the number that Tang Song gave him. When Jixing received the message, she thought it was from Tang Song asking about the car repair after she accidentally hit it. So, Jixing asked about the repair bill. Without revealing his identity, Han Ting replied that he didn't mind about the car, which made Jixing feel relieved. The next day at Guanghua, Chun, who was the head of Jixing's division, announced to the team that they had successfully partnered with Rin AI Hospital to use the biomedical robot. Meanwhile, Han Ting held a Dongyang Board of Directors meeting after being elected CEO. Some of the older directors, including Han Ting's older cousin, Han Yuan, didn't like that Han Ting was now CEO. They were worried that he might change the way Dongyang operates, which could hurt the company. Han Ting understood their concerns and tried to assure the directors that he would lead Dongyang in a better direction. With Dongyang's stake in Guanghua and the launch of the AI medical robot, Han Ting believed it would boost the company's value. Turns out, Han Ting's new plan was mostly welcomed by the directors, even though some didn't like it, especially because he wanted to stop producing Dongyang's standard equipment, which was the company's biggest source of income. There, Han Ting reassured the directors by promising to double Dongyang's earnings even if they stopped making the standard medical equipment. He also said that if his long-term plans didn't work out, he would step down as CEO. Back at Guanghua, Chun called Jixing into his office and told her that she would be getting an annual bonus for her good work. Jixing was excited because she could use the bonus to pay the down payment for the house she and her boyfriend were planning to buy. In another scene, Han Ting was seen feeding a street cat. Since Han Ting and Jixing once took care of a stray cat together, Han Ting ended up taking care of a cat named Dawang. Ever since then, Han Ting has always fed street cats. Not long after, Yi Xiao came to talk about the Han Hai company. During their conversation, Han Ting asked Yi Xiao to improve the performance of the medical 3D printing company. As for Jixing, in her free time, she was making a video call with her boyfriend, Xiao Yichun. They have been together for 4 years, but since Yichun is working as a doctor's assistant in another town, they have to be in a long-distance relationship. One evening, Guanghua held a dinner party for all employees and business partners. Han Ting attended the party and was impressed by how Jixing looked that night. He wanted to find a chance to talk to her, but his efforts were blocked because Zhang Di kept following him around. When Jixing went to the restroom, she overheard Chen and Zhu talking. Chen admitted that he pretended to offer Jixing a bonus just to make her follow his orders, but the bonus was actually going to Zhu's nephew, who worked in Chen's division. Hearing this, Jixing was shocked that Chen had lied to her. After leaving the restroom, Jixing bumped into Zhu, who started teasing her, making her feel uncomfortable. When she tried to leave, Zhu grabbed her, which made Jixing angry. Then, a commotion broke out because Zhu refused to admit he was wrong, and he even pushed Jixing, causing her to fall. Feeling that things had gone too far, Jixing decided to call the police. Meanwhile, Han Ting and Tang Song quickly came over when they heard the commotion. A little while later, the police arrived and checked the surveillance cameras to see if they could find evidence of what Jixing said Zhu did. Unfortunately, the cameras didn't catch Zhu's actions because the flower decorations in the hallway blocked the view, so the police couldn't follow up on Jixing's report. Since Han Ting had another meeting, he asked Tang Song to help Jixing. In the surveillance camera control room, Chen tried to mediate the situation, but Jixing was determined to report Zhu for harassing her. Tang Song then arrived, and following Han Ting's instructions, he told Zhu to confess. Tang Song also mentioned that if Zhu didn't admit what he did, the police could check the camera on the food delivery robot that Zhu had bumped into earlier. Realizing he couldn't escape, Zhu admitted to harassing Jixing, so the police took him to the station for further investigation. After the issue was resolved, Tang Song informed Han Ting, who was driving somewhere, that everything was taken care of. Han Ting felt relieved when he heard the news. Meanwhile, Zhang Di decided to fire Zhu because his actions had damaged the company's reputation. At that time, Jixing thanked Zhang Di for standing up for her. At the airport, Han Ting met with Dr. Jiang to propose a partnership that would combine the Smart Cloud Doctor System, the biomedical robot from Guanghua, and medical 3D printing. Han Ting explained that AI systems would be a big help for doctors in the future. After hearing Han Ting's explanation about these 3 technologies, Dr. Jiang agreed to become the head of the Smart Cloud Doctor System development team. At home, Jixing was shocked when she listened to a voice message from Han Ting and realized that the number she thought belonged to Tang Song was actually Han Ting's number. She felt embarrassed and worried that something she said might have offended Han Ting. The next day, at the Guanghua office, everyone started thinking that Jixing was close to Han Ting, and that she had made a scene to get Zhu fired. The atmosphere in the office became uncomfortable, and even Huang Weiwei, Jixing's closest work friend, began to distance herself from Jixing. Zheng Di also didn't like how close Jixing seemed to be with Han Ting, so she told Chen to make Jixing's job more difficult. Following Zheng Di's orders, Chen assigned Jixing to go to Xingang Hospital to perform maintenance on Bai's medical robot system. Jixing initially refused because it wasn't part of her job, but since Chen kept insisting, Jixing felt she had no choice but to follow her boss's orders. That evening, after finishing some overtime work, Jixing accidentally ran into Han Ting in the elevator. She took the chance to thank him for helping her with the problem at the party the other day. When the elevator doors opened, Jixing quickly tried to avoid Han Ting by hurrying out to catch a taxi. On the way, Jixing asked the taxi driver to drop her off at a bus stop because she couldn't stand the driver's constant talking. As she stood alone at the bus stop in the rain, Han Ting saw her and offered to give her a ride home. Since it was late at night, Jixing didn't have any other option, so she accepted Han Ting's offer. With Tangsong driving, Han Ting took Jixing home. On another day, Jixing went to Xingang Hospital to perform maintenance on the biomedical robot system, but the doctor in charge of using the AI system didn't seem happy to see her. At the same time, Han Ting was also heading to Xingang Hospital after hearing about a problem with the smart cloud doctor system, which had caused many people to queue up at the hospital reception, complaining about the system. Knowing about the issue, Jixing took the initiative to check and fix the smart cloud doctor system until it was working again. Dr. Li thanked Jixing for helping to solve the problem, which calmed down the crowd at the reception. Meanwhile, Han Ting, who had just arrived and heard that Jixing had helped fix the smart cloud doctor system, felt grateful to her. Jixing suspected that someone might have purposely caused the error in the system to damage Dongyang's reputation. Before they parted ways, Han Ting encouraged her not to give up, even though many people at the office were treating her unfairly, as if he knew about her problems at work. Shortly after Han Ting left, an elderly woman approached Jixing and asked to borrow her phone because her own phone's battery had died, and she needed to contact her son. Without hesitation, Jixing lent her phone to the woman, who thanked her and invited Jixing to visit Qingtian fishing village. Back at Guanghua, when Zhang Di heard that Jixing had met with Han Ting at Xingang Hospital, she became even more jealous. She then instructed Chen to make Jixing's work more difficult. Chen responded by signing Jixing up for fieldwork in remote villages, where she would help people use the biomedical robot and the smart cloud doctor system. When Jixing found out about this, she was furious and decided to resign from Guanghua. However, she still planned to complete her final assignment in the remote village. In her anger, Jixing threw her ID card and walked out of the office, surprising Han Ting and Tang Song, who happened to be passing by. Jixing then called Yichen to tell him about her resignation from Guanghua. There, Yichen tried to comfort her by saying he would finish his work soon, so he could return to the city to see her because he was secretly planning to propose to her. Later on, Jixing met with Zhizhou, who once again invited her to join him in starting a medical 3D printing company. However, Jixing said she still needed more time to think about it. In his office, Han Ting received a report about Guanghua's plan to send some employees to the Qingtian area. When he saw that Jixing's name was on the list, Han Ting decided to go to the village too, so he could talk with her. The next day, the Guanghua team and Han Ting traveled to Qingtian village. There, Jixing told Han Ting that she had resigned from her job and hadn't decided what to do next. Upon hearing that Han Ting offered her a position on the Smart Cloud Doctor System Development Team in Dongyang, but Jixing couldn't give him an answer right away. A little later, Jixing started working again, helping the villagers, and she ran into the elderly woman she had helped at the hospital before. The old woman was with her friend, who was struggling to use a prosthetic leg because it didn't fit properly. Seeing this, Jixing felt sorry for the lack of proper healthcare access for the underprivileged, which made it hard for the old woman's friend to get a prosthetic leg that fit well. That night, Jixing was at the village beach, still thinking about the elderly woman she had seen earlier. She started considering joining Zhizhou and creating a medical 3D printing company so she could help people like the old woman. Not long after, Han Ting approached Jixing, and they talked about the time they participated in a competition to build an AI medical robot. When Jixing returned to the city, she met with Zhizhou and agreed to collaborate on starting a medical 3D printing company. Meanwhile, Han Ting was playing basketball with Yi Xiao when he found out about Jixing's plan. He felt annoyed because this meant Jixing wouldn't be working at Dongyang as he had hoped. Yishao also mentioned that starting a business is challenging because it requires a lot of money and preparation. And Jixing, who had just finished meeting with Zhizhou, was happy to see Yichun, who had returned from out of town. She excitedly told him about her business plans with Zhizhou. However, Yichun wasn't thrilled because he wanted to marry Jixing soon. He worried that if Jixing started a business, she wouldn't have enough money or time for their future together. Even though he didn't fully agree with her plan, Yichun pretended to support her decision. Later, Xiaoming, Li Li, and another close friend of Jixing named Wei Qiuzi came over for dinner. While helping Yichun in the kitchen, Qiuzi secretly showed that she had feelings for Yichun. While having dinner together, Jixing told her 3 close friends about her plan to start a medical 3D printing company. And Yichun, who had been planning to propose, decided not to after hearing how determined Jixing was. Even though Jixing's friends couldn't change her mind, they chose to support her in pursuing her dream. On another day, Jixing was seen packing up her belongings at the Guanghua office after officially resigning. Before leaving, she said goodbye to the colleagues she had worked with for the past 3 years. Later, Han Ting met with Jixing after she had officially left Guanghua. During their conversation, Han Ting reminded her that starting a company is not easy. Despite his concerns, Jixing remained firm in her decision to start her own business. A few days later, Jixing and Zhizhou officially launched their new company, which they named Xingchen. They set up the company in Zhizhou's father's old warehouse, which hadn't been used in a long time. At that time, Jixing and Zhizhou cleaned up the space and handled all the necessary permits to get the company running. They also hired 2 employees, Xiaolang and Guofeng, to help them create proposals for investors and design the products they would market once they secured funding. One day, Yishao met Han Ting while he was playing basketball to discuss the proposal they received from Xingchen. They were both impressed that Jixing had the courage to start her own company with limited funds. Meanwhile, Jixing and Zhizhou began meeting with potential investors to propose partnerships, but the investors turned them down because they were only offered a 20% stake. The lack of physical products to show also made it harder for Jixing and Zhizhou to attract investors. Despite this, they decided to meet with Han Ting to seek his support, but he refused. There, Han Ting advised Jixing that if the contract terms were not favorable for investors, it might be better not to continue with the company. However, Jixing was determined to run Xingchen her way. At the same time, Xiaoming was participating in a live streaming battle with other streamers, where the winner was decided by the number of points they received from the audience. Just when Xiaoming was about to win, a social media user named Lu Linjia, who happened to be Han Ting's cousin, gave a large bonus to Xiaoming's opponent, causing her to lose the battle. This made Xiaoming very frustrated. Meanwhile, Han Ting and Yishao continued to discuss Jixing's company. At that time, Han Ting admitted that he could have invested in Xingchen, but he wanted to see how well Jixing could manage the company on her own from the beginning. After chatting, Han Ting and Yishao decided to go to the mall, where Yishao unexpectedly ran into Li Li, who caught his attention. At Xingchen, Jixing was reviewing some suggestions that Han Ting had given her for her proposal. Meanwhile, Li Li and some others came by to congratulate Jixing on starting her new company. They all decided to celebrate by eating together on the rooftop. Then, Jixing noticed Zhizhou trying to get closer to Li Li, the girl he had liked for a long time, but Li Li didn't seem interested in him. While they were eating, Qiuzi invited her 3 friends to accompany her on a blind date with a man her mother had chosen. Since Li Li was busy with work, only Xiaoming and Jixing were able to join Qiuzi. On the day of the blind date, the man who was set to meet Qiuzi turned out to be Linjia. To make the meeting less awkward, Linjia asked Han Ting to come along with him. When they arrived at the restaurant, Han Ting and Linjia met Qiuzi and Xiaoming, who were already there. Jixing was running late because she had some other business to take care of. Just as Han Ting stepped out of the restaurant's VIP room to take a call, he bumped into Jixing, who had just arrived. Both of them were surprised to see each other there. Meanwhile, Xiaoming discovered that Linjia was the person who made her lose the live streaming battle earlier. This led to a misunderstanding between them, making them hesitant to talk to each other. On the other hand, since Qiuzi and Linjia weren't interested in dating each other, they decided to just be friends. During the meal, Linjia noticed that Han Ting kept paying attention to Jixing, and he realized that his cousin was interested in her. After the event, Jixing told Xiaoming and Qiuzi that Han Ting was the CEO of Dongyang, the one who had rejected her investor proposal earlier. The next day at Xingchen, Jixing realized that investors weren't interested in funding her company because Xingchen didn't have any physical products to show. So, Jixing and her team decided to create a product first before looking for investors again. While Jixing was busy preparing everything, Yichun came by to bring food for her and the team. He patiently waited for Jixing to finish her work so they could go home together. On the way home, Yichun started to worry about their relationship since Jixing was getting busier with her new company. He began to feel that their relationship might not work out, especially since Jixing didn't seem to have any plans to get married anytime soon. One day, Xiaoming was doing a live stream and knew Lin Jiao was watching. She asked him not to leave any comments. At that moment, Lin Jiao couldn't stop thinking about Xiaoming, who was still upset about something that happened before. At the same time, Jixing and Jizhou at Xingchen were worried because they needed to buy a very expensive 3D printing machine to make analog products. To save money, they decided to rent the machine instead. Then, Jixing quickly started looking for people nearby who rented 3D printing machines. Later, Jizhou, with help from Lili, met an investor named Wu. Unfortunately, the contract they offered wasn't what Wu wanted, so the deal didn't go through. After the meeting, Wu tried to act inappropriately towards Lili by putting his arm around her. Just then, Wu's wife appeared, and Lili bravely hit Wu for his rude behavior. There, Jizhou was impressed by Lili's courage to stand up to someone like Wu, even though it could put her job at risk since Wu is the boss at the company where she works. That night, to relax, Lili went to a bar where she met Yishao again. They were both interested in each other, so they ended up dancing together and later spent the night at a hotel. The next morning, Lili got a call from her boss, who fired her because of the trouble with Wu. Even though she was upset, Lili decided not to tell Jixing and the others about what happened. On the same day, Yichen and Jixing were on a date celebrating their 4-year anniversary. Han Ting and Zhang Di, who were also at the movies, ran into Jixing, who introduced Yichen as her boyfriend. Han Ting felt heartbroken because he secretly liked Jixing and didn't know she had a boyfriend. After they went into the cinema, Jixing got a call from Jizhou, who told her they found someone who could rent them the 3D printing equipment they needed. Shortly after, Jizhou asked Jixing to come right away to meet the person. Without thinking, Jixing told Yichun she had to leave and take care of her work. This made Yichun feel disappointed because, on their special day, Jixing chose work over spending time with him. At the same time, Chiozi came back to her apartment and was shocked to find that thieves had broken in. She quickly called Yichun to help her fix the broken door. After Yichun finished repairing the door, they took a moment to drink tea together. Meanwhile, Jixing and Jizhou met with a man who was going to rent them a 3D printing machine. The man asked for a deposit, but Jixing didn't have enough money. So, she decided to borrow 100,000 yuan from Lili. Lili quickly sent the money to Jixing so she could pay the deposit and sign the rental contract. That evening, Yichun was at Jixing's house and suddenly proposed to her, but Jixing wasn't sure if she wanted to accept his proposal, even though she took the ring he gave her. Jixing told Yichun that she wanted to make Xingchen successful first before giving him a final answer. This made Yichun secretly feel disappointed because he thought Jixing wasn't considering his feelings. A few days later, Jizhou went to the man's place to finalize the rental, but the man had run away with the deposit Jixing had given him. After asking around, Jizhou found out that this man had tricked many people using the same method. Because of this, Jixing and the others were really worried about the future of Xingchen, since they hadn't gotten any financial help. Seeing that Jixing had been scammed, Xiaolang decided to quit because she didn't want to add to Jixing's stress by expecting a salary during this tough time. Jixing understood and respected Xiaolang's decision, but then she suddenly fainted and had to be taken to the hospital. Meanwhile, Jizhou went to meet Han Ting, the boss of Dongyang, to ask if he would invest in Xingchen. During their talk, Jizhou got the news that Jixing had fainted and was rushed to the hospital, so both he and Han Ting quickly went to check on her. Even though Han Ting saw how sick Jixing was, he told Jizhou that he couldn't invest in Xingchen because he didn't think the company would succeed. A little later, Lili heard that Jixing had fainted and immediately went to visit her friend in the hospital. Lili didn't worry about the money Jixing had borrowed because all she wanted was for Jixing to get better. After Jixing fully recovered, she went back to her regular activities. While hoping to rebuild Xingchen, Jixing suddenly got a call from Han Yuan, who wanted to discuss a possible partnership with Xingchen. In Dongyang, Han Ting heard from Tang Song that Han Yuan was planning to invest in Xingchen. At first, Han Ting was worried that Jixing might accept the investment, but after learning about the strict conditions Han Yuan usually imposed, Han Ting felt sure that Jishing would turn it down. After meeting with Han Yuan, Jishing quickly discovered that many companies that took investments from Han Yuan ended up closing down. This was because Han Yuan would take control by buying more shares and then change the company's systems however she wanted. Realizing this, Jishing decided to reject Han Yuan's investment offer. When Han Ting heard that Jishing had turned down Han Yuan's investment, he was happy and went to see Jishing himself, planning to invest in Xingchen. Jishing agreed but set a condition that Han Ting could not change Xingchen's system unless his shares were worth more than 50%. Upon hearing that, Han Ting quickly agreed because he saw that Xingchen had great potential in the field of medical 3D printing. He also realized that Xingchen could become a competitor to his own company, Han Hai, but he planned to merge the two companies later. To convince the directors about his plan to invest in Xingchen, Han Ting asked for help from He, the board member with the largest shares in Dongyang. Knowing Han Ting's skills, he had no problem with investing in Xingchen and was confident that Han Ting could manage the company well. The next day, Jishing met with Han Ting at the Dongyang office to sign the cooperation contract. Han Ting told her that the investment funds would be provided as soon as all the paperwork was completed. Hearing this, Jishing felt even more excited about growing her company. That evening, Yichen planned to stay at Jishing's house since Xiaoming was away. While they were getting ready for bed, Yichen had already decided that he would end their relationship. The next morning, as Jishing was heading to work, Yichen told her that he couldn't continue their relationship because she was too focused on her company. Realizing that Yichen was serious, Jishing took off the ring he had given her and left for a business event. On the way to the event, Jishing cried, feeling heartbroken that her 4-year relationship with Yichen had ended. Her sadness made her quiet during the event, which caught the attention of Han Ting, who was also there. Han Ting quickly suggested that Jishing go home, so other business people wouldn't get the wrong impression of her for not mingling with others. Even though Jishing was upset about her breakup, Han Ting was secretly pleased because it gave him a chance to get closer to her. To shake off her sadness, Jishing decided to go to a bar and drink. A little while later, Han Ting got a call from Lin Jia, who told him that Jishing was drunk at the bar. Han Ting quickly went to the bar and took Jishing home. When they arrived at Jishing's house, Han Ting asked Lin Jia and Xiaoming to go buy some honey for Jishing. Just as Han Ting was about to leave, Jishing, still not fully conscious, held onto Han Ting's leg, making it hard for him to leave. The next morning, Jishing was surprised to see 3 of her close friends already at her house. Xiaoming then explained how Jishing had gotten drunk the night before, which caused Han Ting to stay overnight because he couldn't leave. Even though Jishing wasn't fully aware at the time, she remembered enough to feel embarrassed about her behavior and worried about how she would face Han Ting later. Jishing also told her friends that she and Yichen had broken up. The 3 of them were shocked because they thought Jishing and Yichen's relationship was going well. Meanwhile, Xiaozi felt that she now had a chance to get closer to Yichen. Jishing then returned to her work at the Xingchen office because she didn't want to stay sad for too long. She was especially motivated because Xingchen's competitors had just released new products, which made her eager to launch her own. On the other hand, Xiaozi's plan to get closer to Yichen seemed to be working out. She was assigned to the hospital where Yichen worked, which meant they saw each other often. Xiaozi's uncle, who was the head doctor supervising Yichen, also made it easier for Xiaozi to spend more time with him. At the Dongyang office, Han Ting received a report from Yishao about how the Han Hai company was growing. Yishao also warned Han Ting to be careful because Han Hai and Xingchen were competing in the same industry. That night, Jishing met with Han Ting at Dongyang's office to update him on Xingchen's progress. Han Ting asked Jishing to give him a report every 2 weeks. At first, Jishing didn't like the idea, but Han Ting reminded her that since he invested in Xingchen and owned 33.4% of the shares, he had the right to know how the company was doing. When Jishing got home, she was thrilled to see her mother, Hailan, who had come from out of town to visit her. Meanwhile, Zhang Di went to Han Ting's apartment and brought him some food. Even though Zhang Di tried to get closer to Han Ting, he only saw her as a friend. This made Zhang Di annoyed because she noticed that Jishing always received better treatment from Han Ting. On another day, Han Ting cooked food for Jishing and brought it to her house. When he arrived, he met Jishing's mother, who mistakenly thought he was Yichen and asked him to buy strawberries. While at Jishing's house, Han Ting got his jacket wet because the faucet was broken. Hailan then lent him her pink cardigan to wear while his jacket dried. Later, when Jishing came home, she was surprised to see Han Ting in her house. She quickly cleared up her mother's misunderstanding, explaining that Han Ting wasn't Yi-chun. Upon hearing that, Hailan apologized, and they all had lunch together. During the meal, Hailan smiled as she noticed the care and attention Han Ting showed towards Jisheng, realizing that Han Ting liked her daughter. The film ends. The moral lesson from this film is never mistake your daughter's new boyfriend for her ex, or you might end up lending your favorite pink cardigan to the wrong guy. And always remember, love triangles are even messier when food and wet jackets are involved.